So we have kind of a little bit of a different episode today, but then it's still in keeping with all of our conspiracy stuff. So maybe it's really not that different.
My
But
favorite stuff.
anyway, yeah. So a couple weeks ago, Tucker Carlson did an interview with this guy named Tucker Max. And I was super excited to hear it because I read Tucker Max's books like 15 years ago. And it was kind of like drunk college guy hookup stories. And I thought they were super hilarious. He had a book called I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell. And I like literally laughed out loud reading that book. So I was curious about the interview because Tucker Max was like this total party guy. But I guess now he lives on a fully sufficient, like, homestead in Texas with a wife and kids. And his life is the complete opposite of what it was back then. And so during this interview, Tucker Carlson was asking Tucker Max, like, if he would send his kids to public school. And Tucker Max was like, definitely not. And I want to play this clip from the show because it sent me down a rabbit hole in my own mind about like how we're being controlled and manipulated. And so, Stephanie, I want to know what you think of this.
And be totally fine. And we're surrounded by people in our community who are, for the most part, in the same position or very similar. They have similar values, similar approach to the world. That's why we started a Waldorf school literally 3 minutes from our.
So for viewers who are not familiar with Waldorf, what is that?
So there's lots of different educational philosophies. Acton, Montessori, public school. Waldorf is a philosophy that started in Germany like 150 years ago. And I think it is by far, of the educational philosophies, it's by far the best. It is the one that kind of feeds the emotional side. It's like a Renaissance style, right? Where it kind of tries to help
the whole child.
Help create the whole child. Of the educational styles, I think it's the best. That being said, I'm still not sure if organized schooling is right for kids or not. Because right now we have one kid I'm homeschooling because he doesn't have enough kids in his class for the Waldorf. Like there just aren't kids. He doesn't have a class there. But the other two are Waldorf. Waldorf's the best by far if you're going to go to a school. I'm on the fence about which is better or worse.
So all of your children are out of the public schools?
Oh, never went into public schools. My man, I don't hate my kids. I'm never going to send them to public schools. And
that raises a philosophical, and I want to put this to the President of the United States,
right,
with a message I think is relevant to you, which is that those are not your kids, actually. Here he is.
Rebecca put a teacher's creed into words when she said, there's no.
Okay, I don't think this is the right clip.
Well, that's okay because I already have a lot to say about it.
That is totally not the clip. Like, wow. Okay.
Well, okay. So can we just talk about that clip though? Because I think it's like, I mean, that like is 100,000% resonating with me. Because as you know, I have 3 kids and my oldest, Alexis, that was on the show, is going to public school. And she's always been in public school because at least where we live, private school is like the same or more than college. Like it is insane how expensive it is. And there's a whole other like aspect to that. But with that being said, like I didn't wake up to all of this until like a few years ago, where, you know what I mean? And so she did like a year and a half at home. And then I gave her the choice and she wanted to go to school for the social aspect, which I get, and I don't want to like take that away from her. But I agree with what he's saying because when you look, and we've like, I think briefly touched on this in the past, but the whole education system, the public school system especially, is and was created by the elites in the Industrial Revolution because what they needed at the time were factory workers to come and fill up their factories. And so they basically wanted to produce a compliant worker that wouldn't question authority, that would put their head down, produce, and not question the narrative, not try to do anything else other than clock in and clock out. And that sounds crazy, right? I mean, that was so long ago. The system's never been updated. And just think about it for a second, okay? What happens when school starts? The bell rings. And if you're tardy, if you're late, you get in trouble, right? So you have to get there on time. It's teaching that discipline. Like the bell rings, you show up to class. And then what happens? You sit down, you shut up, and you listen to the boss, AKA the teacher. And if you question them, if you try to talk out of turn, you get in trouble, right? Um, if you try to get up from your seat as a kid and move around, you get in trouble. Then what happens? Like you ask permission if you have to use the bathroom. The bell rings again and you're told when you can eat. The bell rings again, you're told when you can stop eating. The bell rings again, you're told when you can go to recess, AKA your break, your 15-minute break at work. And then you don't get to go home until the bell rings at the end of the day and you've done all your work. It is like literally conditioning a working class. And knowing everything I know about the subconscious, it's like this isn't something that is consciously taking place. They're priming the subconscious of all these kids to be workers. And so I came across this like super interesting study that was in the Lancet years ago, but basically like all these big corporations, they paid a group of researchers to go out into the world and figure out like who are the geniuses? How can we seek out the geniuses because we want them to come work for us at our companies and like develop new shit, like new iPhones and stuff. So they go out and they start with kindergartners and then they interview them every year all the way through they graduate high school. They found that like 99, or it was either 98 or 99% of kindergartners were all predispositioned to be geniuses. The
Wow.
reason for that is because they're completely tuned in to the right hemisphere of their brain, which is your creativity and your imagination. And that's what makes a genius. You have to be able to think outside the box. You have to be able to come up with new things and not be given direction, but you have to be able to like follow these things. So they go on interviewing them. By the time they graduated high school, 0%, not one genius left in the bunch. And so the study basically showed that school makes you dumber, which I don't like the way they like phrase that. It just makes you compliant. It makes you not think for yourself. It makes you stuck in your left hemisphere of the brain because what happens when you start using your imagination and your creativity, you get in trouble. Sit down. Like it's not time for that. It's not art class. It's not playtime. And then when you get older, like my daughter's age, it's like you need to get serious. You need to start thinking about college. You shouldn't be playing around with art and you shouldn't be using your imagination. It's time to get realistic and think about the real world. And you're totally trained to be in the left hemisphere of your brain. So that's just like the foundation of I would say the school system. I don't even think it's just the public school system. I think a lot private schools as well are kind of like setting up everyone to be average, which is why you have all these college graduates that are all the same. None of them can get jobs. None of them have anything, no special skills, no out of the box thinking. They're just a bunch of workers that are going to clock in and clock out and not question authority and need to be told what to do. So
Yeah,
that is like crazy.
it is crazy. And it's like, that's what sent me down the rabbit hole because I remembered you and I talked about this like a couple years ago. And it got me thinking about like the clip that I did not appropriately play that I can't find right now because we're recording. But it brought to mind that like there's this huge difference right now between if you look at the generations, like the baby boomers, Gen Xers, and the millennials, and you compare them to like Gen Z and Gen Alpha or whatever kids are called today. I think it's Gen Alpha. But like if you look at pretty much anyone who went to school before the early 2000s, like we were raised in this very specific culture of like respecting authority and not questioning your superiors, and especially looking at like teachers and doctors and the police, and you were taught to trust in the government, and capitalism was like a good thing, and the goal was the American dream, right? And there was this overarching idea that in order to succeed in life, you go to college and then you get a stable job with a good company that has benefits and insurance. And you're going to stay in this 9 to 5 job with the same company for 20 to 30 years. And like, if you don't go to college, then you learn a specific trade and you get a job supported by a union. And then you work in that job for 20 or 30 years. And like, for the most part, like there's the odd exception of people who get independently rich, but the average American aim was like just be part of the middle class and make ends meet and live this moderately comfortable life designed around the concept of the expectations of success that were ingrained in us from early childhood. And like if you follow these rules, that's how you become, quote, successful. But then I look at the younger generations and I see this culture shift. And it's not so much about achieving a nine to five job for the American dream anymore, because you look at Gen Z and even some of the millennial generation, and like they're quickly learning they can't afford to buy a home or pay their bills. You've got adults in like their 20s and 30s living with their parents. They're depressed and resentful. And there's all these studies that have shown that like they fear being homeless and never having enough money. And like all these mental health problems are through the roof. And then we look at the education system, and like kids are being heavily influenced by their teachers and superiors still. And it's still this same like design of following the rules, but now the narrative is different. And like the focus isn't on being respectful and learning to be a good citizen and contribute to your community and fit neatly into this 9 to 5 world that we were sold on. It's like now kids are bombarded with this fucking DEI agenda and gender confusion. And they're being taught that traditional American values are evil. And if you're white and you're not a person of color, then you should feel bad about yourself. And in fact, like competition overall is bad and capitalism is bad. And the country was built on racism. So we need to erase history and make reparations. And you shouldn't try to get ahead because that's not fair to anyone else. And like you should trust in the socialist communist government, like AKA our democracy, to take care of you because the government knows what's best and everyone should be equal and entitled to the same things in life, whether they work for it or not. And on top of that, like the narrative that we're all destroying the climate. So people need to go out and protest for weeks on and months on end about social justice issues while expecting people to cater to you and your made up gender pronouns. And it's like, the total opposite of how we were raised, right? But then I realized like it's not. It's the same shit. It's all about control. It's just like a different kind of control to fit a different narrative. And so like we can sit here today and say like our kids are being brainwashed and indoctrinated in school and manipulated to believe in all this crazy shit, which they are, but realistically, we were brainwashed and indoctrinated and manipulated too, but just in a different way. And like that realization just kind of like blew my mind.
Yeah. It totally does. And something that I learned was that wealthy people, um, I mean, I'm talking like the real wealthy people. They're not sending their kids to like the normal private school. They're sending their kids to like the elite private schools. They don't teach any of this stuff. They don't want to produce workers. They don't talk to their kids and say, what company do you want to go work for? They say, what company do you want to create? You're
Yeah.
going to be the one people work for. That's the difference. The rest of us, all of us peasants, we're going to be the workers that work for them. They're going to be the ones that start a business. Imagine how powerful that is if you start talking to your kid that way. Like, what do you want to create? What business are you going to operate? Like, that's the way we should be talking because it expands their mind and it helps them think outside of the box and think, I don't have to listen to a teacher, a professor, a boss. Like, I can create something of my own. And what's interesting is like, I feel like there's this split happening right now, right? Like with social media and all the technology we have available, I feel like there's a divide. So you have the people that are still like fully indoctrinated and they're just gonna keep, being in their like little world of like worker bees. And then you have this younger generation that a lot of them are either not holding themselves accountable. Like I saw one girl the other day on TikTok and this podcaster like called her out because she wanted to blame all her problems on her parents. Her parents are why she can't afford a house. Her parents are why she can't afford groceries. And he's like, you're like 24 fucking years old. Grow up. Like, I'm sorry, but grow up. So you have those people, but you also have this other generation of kids that I see day in and day out on social media that decided, you know what? I'm not going to go to college. I'm instead going to work my ass off on social media and find my little way in there and figure out how to make a living doing it. And they're making way more than their parents at the age of like 22 years old. And so it's kind of cool because you're always going to have those people that are like so freaking indoctrinated, but you do have this younger generation that are starting to expand their mind again and are starting to say, you know what? I don't want to accept this 9 to 5 narrative. I don't want to go work for some asshole that's going to be condescending. I want to do my own thing. And they're creating businesses that are like way more successful than any, day job they would have. So like it's really interesting what technology is creating, but when you're talking about like the different generations, I may have even heard this on that podcast. I'm not sure. But someone on some podcast, I think it was one of Tucker's podcasts, were saying that the boomer generation, like the people that were in like the 50s to 60s, it was the only time in history that the middle class was able to build wealth. The only time in the history of documented history that the middle class was rising up, where you could have the wife stay home, the husband works, they have more than enough to buy a house, a car, have 7 kids that are all well taken care of, and have money to save and invest and grow wealth. The only time. That doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. And so the problem is those same people are the ones that taught us and are still teaching this generation that, oh, if you just work really hard, you'll be fine. Because it was fine for a time. It was fine for them, but that's not the case anymore. You can work your ass off and go work for a company, and I guarantee you're still going to be struggling and you're not going to build wealth.
Yeah.
And so that's what's changed, but they're still teaching the same shit, even though the world's completely changed.
And I feel like this, like what you just mentioned with this rise in people basically creating things through social media, right? Like you have social influencers that can get immediately wealthy just based on their content. And kids are going out now without being in college and like just creating companies. And I feel like this is probably what is, or I guess like maybe this is the impetus behind the push for this global agenda, right? Because like it's been coming to light for the past few years. It's been there all along. If you look at how we were raised, like the whole agenda of the worker bees, right? And for us, it was sold to us as believing in America and the American dream, and America's the greatest nation in the world, and we need to take pride in that. And in order to like achieve and maintain that American dream, you work hard and you keep your nose clean and you do what the government tells you and you pay your taxes and you be a good citizen. Well, now with this shift of what we're seeing people do with social media and creating their own companies, and like that combined with the shift of the indoctrination style that's like no longer about being a proud American, it's about erasing American pride and identity because we want this one world government controlled by the elites. And in order to get people to go along with that narrative, you have to brainwash them to believing in fear culture, like the climate crisis, so that people will agree we need to get rid of oil and gas and give up our energy independence for the sake of the greater good, and like, give up animals and eat bugs and fake meat. And you have to brainwash people into believing that males and females are the same and anyone can be their made up gender, so that we lose our identity. And like then it turns the tables on people who believe in traditional gender roles, and they become sexist and supporting toxic masculinity, and they hate the LGBT community. So then you have to hate them. And it's this brainwashing of people to ignore the fact that every fucking country in the world has a history of slavery, and every great nation was built by conquering other nations. And telling people instead like America's the worst country of all, and like we stole everything from the natives and other cultures, and all of our national heroes did all this evil shit, so we have to tear down our history and memorials and rename sports teams and military bases. And don't say you're proud to be an American, because you need to hate yourself for the deeds done by these generations who came before you. And it's just like all of this brainwashing of the DEI agenda and entitlement, and it's like brainwashing people into believing that all of this is necessary to preserve democracy, right? Which is AKA communism, socialism. So it's like, I feel like there's this huge shift in the way the elites want us to think and believe about our limitations as individuals and as a society, especially since this younger people have gone against the narrative that we were raised with. And even the indoctrination that they're doing in schools, it's not entirely working, right? And we have this combination of what you were talking about with people like thinking on their own and doing their own thing, along with this generation that's just like angry and disgruntled and is being raised to blame everything wrong in their lives on their parents and American traditional values. And like, I'm bringing this up because we are always talking about the silent majority, right? Like, we know there's this huge portion of the population that's frustrated by what's happening in our country and like what our government is doing and how the country that we were raised to believe in is being destroyed. But these are the same people who are also like taught you don't stir the pot and you don't go out and protest and riot and you obey the law and you be a good citizen. And like, despite this indoctrination agenda in school, you also have a lot of these people who've like managed to retain parental control and they've raised their kids to share these beliefs. So like, even though we have all these confused and like angry people out there who believe the narrative, there's still a good portion of people who share the ideology and they feel helpless and like they don't know what to do. And because of the way they've been raised to follow the rules and respect authority and work hard, like they don't speak out and they remain the silent majority. Or it's like the people that protest peacefully, like the actual definition of peaceful protest and not the, riot definition. And maybe like they comment on social media and like you have this growing subset of people who are speaking out, right? Parents speaking out to protect their kids. People like us who've started podcasts or social media platforms where they speak out. But for the most part, I feel like people who were raised with the indoctrinated beliefs that we were, like they don't rock the boat. And they're just kind
Right.
of waiting for someone else or like praying that common sense or good will prevail. And they're holding out hope that like, and we just need to win the next election and get Trump or someone in office and things will change. So they stay quiet and like they listen to and support media personalities that have conservative values or American values, and the message resonates with them. But they're like too afraid or hesitant to speak out publicly because like they've seen what happens to other people that do, like with the elites, and they don't want to risk it. And like, I know I'm just rambling here, but here's where I'm going with it. Like, or did you want to say something?
Well, I just think that they don't want to risk it because that's what the middle class has become. Like
Right.
you're living so tightly that you can't risk your job. Like you will not be able to survive. You know what I mean? It's like, so they can't. But then who are the people that are protesting? It's all of these Ivy League college students. It's the world of academia. It's like the elites, the wealthy, and like I would say the upper middle class, the people that can afford to go to these institutions. They are the ones that are indoctrinated because those are the institutions that have been infiltrated throughout the years by these communist regimes. I mean, it's part of all the steps to communism, right? You take
Yeah.
out all the values. You take out religion from school. You start to input like perverted things that go against everything, that should be held sacred and valued. Um, and just to go conspiracy mode for 1 second, I think that the whole feminist movement was a big part of that. Because what happened with the feminist movement? Well, all of a sudden you went from all these women that were at home raising their kids, taking them to church, teaching them values, being very involved in like their child's life, like teaching them to be respectable and behave and everything else, to all going into the workforce where they're so exhausted that they have nothing left at the end of the day. And during the day, where do they go? They put them in these programs where their kids
Mhm.
can be indoctrinated, and they're so busy with their job they're not paying attention to what's going on. And oh, by the way, now the government can get twice as the tax because you've got twice as many people working. And then the corporations have the excuse of, well, we have to cut our pensions and we can't pay you this big salary because now we have women in the workforce. So now everyone gets less pay, less benefits, no pensions. Like, it fucking destroyed the middle class. And that's why the 50s, the 60s were like the only period where the middle class was like truly thriving and building wealth, because the feminist revolution fucked it all up. And I mean, I am like someone that believes women should have like equal rights and everything else, but at the same time, I think it was the government that was fully behind that movement, and they just used like Gloria Steinem as like the poster girl for it. But I think it fucked up our country and our kids, and it allowed this indoctrination to happen without anyone realizing until now. That's my
Yeah.
take.
No, I 100% agree with you. And it's like, here's where I'm going to get like off into the woo woo weeds that I'm going to count on you to bring it home. But it's like, I feel like this whole thing with the silent majority and what's happening in our country, and even though people are starting to speak out, like, I feel like you and I were part of this silent majority, right? Until we weren't. And like, obviously, I want you to comment on this from your perspective, but part of what got me to this place of realizing our whole lives have just been by design to be a cog in the wheel of keeping big government functioning and feeding the elites and the powers and control was, I mean, it really COVID opened my eyes more than anything. And when I started listening to podcasts like Andy Frisella's podcast, and even before that, before COVID, when I got into law of attraction and law of vibration and energy and manifestation, and like the more I got into this world of understanding that these concepts go back fucking centuries. They've been proven and supported by modern neuroscience. And like the more I started to understand what our brains and our mind are capable of and how they're quite literally the most powerful tools we have in life, that by design were taught from a very early age to not use correctly, and like the incredible power in our subconscious thoughts and how they influence and create the way we perceive the world and our own limitations. And we've just been conditioned to believe it's all woo-woo nonsense because it contradicts the narrative of control. And literally, we are so much more powerful than what we've been conditioned and manipulated to believe. And then you see now it's everywhere, right? You go on YouTube and you can find thousands and thousands of videos about this stuff, podcasts, books. And like the more I paid attention to it, the more holy shit moments I had, that like everything I have been led to believe my entire life was a fucking lie. And then the more empowered I became to speak out and be a leader for like truth and freedom. And like, Stephanie, this is your wheelhouse. So I know you can elaborate much more eloquently than I can. But like, you feel the same, right?
I think you're spot on with what you're saying. And this is what's so crazy, okay? Like you said, like woo woo nonsense. That's what we're taught to believe. Who do you think came up with woo woo? It's a fucking CIA, just like they came up with the term conspiracy. They want everyone to look at it as like, that's ridiculous and you're an idiot if you believe it. And you want the most in our face proof of it. Look at Napoleon Hill's book called Think and Grow Rich. So this guy, he went around and interviewed the rich of the rich, all of the elites who we would consider the elite class of his time. Um, like Ford and Henry Ford and JP Morgan, like all these people that were like super elite, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, Carnegie. And he wrote this book. Now he didn't call it the law of attraction, but it was the concept of law of attraction that they all knew. I mean, they lived their entire life by this concept, okay? there's a reason why they were successful, and they didn't want anyone else to know about it because that threatens their place of power. Just like, they wanted to indoctrinate all these kids to be workers in their factory. They don't want to produce leaders because that threatens their power, their family's generational wealth. And it worked because look at all these families still have fucking wealth like generations later. And so they very much believe in this stuff to the degree that everything they do surrounds, the concepts of the law of attraction. But then, they throw out these terms like woo woo and try to discredit it so the rest of us don't catch on, because that would threaten their place in society, right? And so I think that it's interesting because when you look at a lot of these spiritual people, like that are into the law of attraction and astrology and like all these different things, they're the first ones that woke up to all this bullshit, And like, it's interesting because in the beginning, I always looked at those people, they were all very liberal, very, very liberal. But they're very spiritual, and they were able to see through all of this like conditioning and kind of think outside the box. And now I wouldn't say they're liberal. I would say they're like truth seekers. They know it's all bullshit. They see right through it. And the people that are still buying the bullshit again are the people going to the elite Ivy League universities, right? Like
Where they're being taught by the elites who believe in this stuff.
where they will then be primed to take
Yes.
over the elite class.
Yeah.
They will be the next generation. That's why Harvard and all these schools, like if your dad went there, if your granddad, if all you get in, like it's to continue their freaking, generational wealth and keep the rest of us like dumb and stupid and too busy to notice. But now with technology, that's changing. People actually have an option. And, I talk about this all the time, but like my 14-year-old, I tell her every day, at the end of the day, I'm not going to force her any which way. She can do whatever the hell she wants to do. But do I think college is the best route? Absolutely not. I am teaching her, just like these wealthy people, think about what business you want to create. Think about what you want to do in the world, and just do that now while you're living at home, while you're young, while you could make mistakes and lose money, and it's not going to affect you as much as when you're, you know, the age I was when I decided to start my business. And that's what we need to start teaching these kids. And it's hard because so many parents are so indoctrinated, they're never going to wake up to it. And I think people slowly are, but I mean, I'm in a lot of these parent groups in public school, and they're all pushing and putting the pressure on these kids to get good grades. You better go to college. You better go to college. And it's like, why? Why? So they can graduate and not find a job. And then if they do find a job, they're making maybe $50,000 a year, which you can't live off of nowadays. Like, it's just insane to me, but there's so many people still following the narrative. And I think another reason why there's a reason why all the elites in the government want to shut down TikTok.
Right.
People are making a full-time living on TikTok. I mean, massive amounts of money through TikTok, and they're communicating, they're getting the word out, and the elites are freaking out about it. And so that's why they want to get rid of it. And I think there's like a great awakening happening, which means there's going to be a lot of people at the top that are going to do everything they can to shut us up and dumb us down. And I don't know. I don't know where it's going to go from here.
Yeah, and I feel like even the people who are waking up to it, I think for young people, it's very different from like older generations. Because I even look at myself, like I didn't wake up to this world until what, 5, 6 years ago, really.
Yeah.
And by then I was in my mid 40s. And it's like, I think a lot of people who discover this stuff later in life feel like they're fucked because it's too late for them to do anything about it. But the bottom line is like, what, regardless of whatever generation you were born into, like we've all been raised with an agenda, right? To like control and contain our true abilities. And most people, even if they do realize it, like they've been so conditioned their whole lives to believe in the agenda that they still don't see the true power that they have. And like the crazy thing to me is like when you do, you look at life so differently. And so my point with like going down this whole rabbit hole was like we can either allow ourselves to continue to be manipulated by the government and the elite agenda and the narratives that they're feeding us in this whole like fucking one world nonsense, or we make the choice to manipulate our own minds and our own beliefs by fully understanding our capabilities and like the power of independent critical thought. And like if everybody could open their eyes to this and like combine this with the inspired like collective consciousness, that's how you fucking take back control from the elites in this global agenda. And it's like the answer's right there in front of us. And even though people are waking up to it, it's like, are enough people going to come together before it's too late to do anything about it?
I'm going to put a positive spin on it, surprisingly. Like, I think the tides are turning. I think that, you know, we're seeing Hollywood crumble. They're a big part of the indoctrination, by the way. It's not just the school system. They are, I mean, freaking told what to say, what to support, what to do. They're paid a lot of money to do it. People aren't listening to them anymore. People would rather listen to an influencer that they can relate to, that's like them, that's a normal person. So there's that aspect of it. And you look at like the Ivy League schools, okay? It wasn't that long ago that we all still revered them. Like, I mean, hell, even maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, if my daughter had gotten into Harvard or something, I'd be like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like Harvard or Yale or whatever. I don't think people, I know I don't look at it that way anymore. And I think most of the masses are waking up and realizing like this has gone to shit. And these schools are like a big fucking joke. And I think their system is crumbling.
Yeah, I remember thinking like, oh, those are so out of my league. Like I
Mhm.
went to Berkeley, which was the closest in my mind that I was going to get to an
Well,
Ivy
that's one of
League.
them. Yeah. That's one of them. And it's like for the longest time, it was like that was what people were striving for. And now it's like, no, like if you want to be part of this DEI agenda, okay, but that's not what normal people are wanting. And every day, I think more and more people are waking up to this like new option outside of the corporate world where they can create their own money. And then you look at like what's happening in the stock market, where all of these people in the middle class are teaming up to play the elites at their own game and
Mhm.
like screwing them on like their short sales and stuff. And it's like, I think the tides are turning. Like, I really do think there's a lot of people waking up. There's a lot of people sick and tired of the nonsense. And I know it's not happening as quickly as we want, but I feel like it's getting to that point where it's like, you got to speak up now or you're never going to speak up. I mean, if you look at inflation, in order to have what our grandparents had in the 50s when the middle class was like the middle class, the American dream, they calculated everything and took into account inflation, you'd have to make $240,000 a year. No one's making that, like no
Yeah.
one. And so it's like, if you're not going to stand up now because you know you're worried your shitty job might like call HR on you, then like whatever, you deserve
When are
everything
you?
you're getting.
Yeah.
Like I have no sympathy for you whatsoever. So it's like that's where we're at, but I do think like enough is enough and people every single day are standing up to it. And if there's a few of us, it does nothing. But if you have the majority of the population all sticking together and saying, screw you, we're not going to do it anymore, that's when change happens. And I feel like we're getting to that point. Is it going to be too late? I don't know, but I'm trying to be optimistic here. And maybe
Yes.
it
And
starts by not sending our kids to Ivy League schools. I'm just going to throw that out there.
yeah, and getting enough people to open their eyes before, the government shuts down the internet.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so it's like, and you know, if you don't want to be the one to like actually say the words, fine, but then go share the episode. Like, take someone else's words and start putting it out there. That's the least you can do. And I promise you, you can't get fired from your job for that. Okay. You can definitely fight that pretty easily. So it's like, do something. I mean, don't just sit around and accept it. Like, do something. Make a stand for what you believe in, and like help wake other people up. That's the least that people can do at this point in time. So anyhow, that's where we're at. So I'm going to look at it as a good way. I feel like our eyes were shut for a long time. We were totally indoctrinated. We were totally blind to it. But I feel like we are waking up in large, large numbers. And if we keep pushing and speaking up, it's going to change. Like, we can create change. There is enough of us, more than enough of us to create change. But it just starts with like putting it out there and speaking up. So everyone go share this episode. Share every episode that you resonate with,
Yes.
because we're not afraid to be outspoken, clearly. So we'll speak for you.
Yes, and if you're listening to the podcast and you haven't like given us a review and you like us, leave us a review so we can like climb higher in the charts and get more people to hear us.
Yes. Yeah. Go on Apple Podcasts, leave a review. It literally takes 2 seconds. And yeah, it really does help boost in the whatever Apple algorithm they have. So, okay. Well, I feel like we just uncovered decades of programming and indoctrination. So that was pretty good. We did that in a good amount of time. I hope it gave everyone like an interesting perspective. And yeah, we'll see you back here next time. Thanks for tuning in.